My fiancée ambushed me with a prenup at dinner. I walked out. The next morning, her lawyer asked, "What did you do with your estate?" The cream-colored folder landed between my shrimp cocktail and water glass. It was thick, embossed with the name of a downtown Nashville law firm, and placed beside my plate as though it were part of the table setting. Across from me, Avery Whitfield, my fiancée of 14 months, the woman I had proposed to on a Memphis rooftop with her grandmother's ring, smiled as if she had given me a gift. I looked around the table. Avery's college roommate, Darcy, was there, along with her best friend Priya, Priya's husband Grant, Avery's older sister Nora, Nora's boyfriend Fletcher, and an unfamiliar man holding a leather portfolio. He wore the practiced smile of someone who handled uncomfortable situations for a living. I knew he was a lawyer before he introduced himself. "Wyatt," Avery said, tilting her head the way she did when she wanted something and believed the decision had already been made. "We thought it made sense to handle this tonight. Somewhere relaxed. Somewhere we could talk as a group." She had described the evening as a private preview of our rehearsal dinner at one of Nashville's most expensive steakhouses. Instead, she had assembled an audience and placed a prenuptial agreement beside my plate, expecting everyone around us to make the ambush appear mature and reasonable. I rested my hand on the folder and thought about the previous 4 weeks, every private meeting, document, signature, and careful decision no one at that table knew about. The lawyer kept smiling. I lifted the folder, set it down unopened, and stood. "Enjoy your legal buffet," I said. "I'll see myself out." The table went silent. That was when our engagement ended, although the truth had begun revealing itself weeks earlier. My name is Wyatt Callahan. I was 44, raised in Clarksville, Tennessee. My father spent 31 years in an auto parts warehouse, and my mother taught 4th grade at the same elementary school for 27 years. We were not wealthy, but the bills were paid, the refrigerator stayed full, and a dependable used car sat in the driveway. My parents worked, saved, repaired what they could, and kept going. At 26, I borrowed $40,000 to open a specialty packaging company in a leased warehouse outside Nashville. $12,000 came from my parents, $20,000 from a small business loan, and $8,000 from my savings. We made custom packaging for regional food brands too small to meet the minimum orders demanded by national suppliers. It was pallets, foam inserts, cardboard specifications, tight margins, and 4:30 in the morning deliveries. By 34, I employed 17 people. By 38, 41. By 42, I operated facilities in Nashville, Knoxville, and Huntsville, Alabama, with annual revenue slightly above $8 million. I repaid my parents with interest within 4 years. I never took a partner or outside investor. The company was mine, built through 18 years of repetition, risk, and refusal to quit when quitting would have been easier. I am not saying that to boast. I am saying it because the company supported dozens of families, carried my parents' original faith in me, and represented nearly half my life. The business, and everything connected to it, was what Avery's folder was really about. I met Avery 2 years earlier at a charity gala in Brentwood. She was 38, recently out of a long relationship, and worked as a senior marketing director for a regional healthcare network. She was intelligent, dryly funny, and an unusually attentive listener. We dated 8 months before I proposed, and she said yes before I finished asking. Our October wedding was planned for a Cumberland River venue with 90 guests. Her mother and sisters took control of the details almost immediately, which suited me because I was managing a facility expansion. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But Avery had begun calling my company "our business" around friends and speaking casually about when Wyatt's company gets acquired, though I had never discussed selling. Nora asked pointed questions about revenue, valuation, silent partners, loans, and ownership of the facilities. When I once mentioned meeting my accountant, something crossed Avery's face and disappeared. I ignored it because I did not want to distrust the woman I planned to marry. 5 weeks before the Ridgeline dinner, I met my business attorney, Douglas Pritchard, for lunch. Doug had represented me for 11 years and knew nearly every part of my financial life. After discussing routine contracts, he leaned back and asked, "Wyatt, has Avery mentioned a prenuptial agreement?" "No." "Should she have?" "I've received informal inquiries about your company, who owns what, whether the facilities are personal property or held through an LLC, and how the major assets are structured. Those questions usually come before a prenuptial discussion." He named the family law firm making the inquiries. I recognized it because 3 weeks earlier, I had found one of its business cards tucked beneath a magazine on our kitchen counter after Nora came for dinner. I had assumed it fell from her purse. Now I knew it had not. I drove home with my mind racing and my body strangely still. I thought about 14 months with Avery, the rooftop, the ring, October, and the vows I had been writing in a notebook inside my nightstand. Then I thought about the company my parents' $12,000 had helped create, the 41 employees depending on it, and the vulnerabilities, divorce, litigation, or financial maneuvering could create. Before reaching the apartment, I called Doug. I need a serious conversation, and it stays between us for now. My office, Monday morning. On Monday, I told him about the card, the inquiries, Avery's comments, Nora's questions, and every small warning I had ignored. After listening, he asked what would be at stake if the relationship ended the next day. We talked for 2 hours. By the end, I had a plan not to punish Avery, hide money, or destroy anything, but to implement the protections Doug had recommended for years. Sound business structure is not revenge. It protects the owner, the company, its employees, and everyone whose livelihood depends on it. Doug had suggested these protections regardless of my relationship status. The danger was not only a future divorce, it was any lawsuit, creditor problem, or personal dispute that could reach assets the company needed to operate. Over the next 4 weeks, I made several significant legal and financial changes. Everyone was lawful, proper, and long overdue. Doug had urged me to make most of them since the company crossed $5 million in revenue, but I had been too busy, comfortable, and trusting. I will not describe every active instrument or transaction. The mechanics are not the point. By the time Avery placed that folder beside my plate, the business structure I should have created years earlier was already in place. The Ridgeline sat on West End Avenue. Its aged ribeye cost $92. The wine list started near $60 a bottle, and amber lighting made everyone look as though they belonged in a movie. Avery called the evening a pre-rehearsal dinner preview, a relaxed meal for our inner circle before the larger event during wedding week. I dressed well, made the reservation for 8, and drove there believing we were celebrating. I thought about fall along the Cumberland River, 90 guests, and the unfinished vows in the notebook beside my bed. 7 people were already seated when I arrived. The folder waited beside my open chair like an extra napkin. The unfamiliar man stood and offered his hand. Wyatt, I'm Greg. I've been helping Avery put together something she wanted to share with you tonight. He was Greg Holloway, an associate at the law firm. Darcy studied her menu too carefully. Priya watched me with what might have been sympathy or curiosity. Grant wanted to disappear. Nora stared directly at me with her chin raised. Fletcher stayed on his phone. Avery wore the knowing smile that said she possessed information I did not. She was wrong. This is a prenuptial agreement, Greg said, gesturing toward the folder. Avery felt it would be comfortable to review it in a relaxed setting with people you both trust. The main provisions protect each party's premarital assets and I know what a prenuptial agreement is. I was genuinely calm. 4 weeks of preparation had led to that moment, and the folder confirmed every instinct I had finally trusted. Of course, Greg said. We thought tonight would be a good... Why is there a lawyer at my engagement dinner? The table fell quiet. Wyatt, this is just... Avery began. A lawyer, I repeated. You said this dinner was for our inner circle. Instead, you brought an attorney and 6 people closer to you than to me. Are they witnesses? Moral support? Who is this supposed to make comfortable? Priya looked down. Grant looked miserable. Greg tried again. We thought approaching it in a relaxed environment. No. You thought that surrounding me with Avery's people and handing me legal papers in public would create enough pressure for me to be agreeable, possibly before reading them carefully or consulting my own attorney. I looked at Avery. Is that what you thought? Her jaw tightened. That isn't fair. You hid the purpose of this dinner, Greg's presence, and the fact that you had already prepared legal documents. You involved our friends without asking me and denied me the opportunity to bring independent counsel. Now you are telling me what is unfair. Nora interrupted. Wyatt, don't make this bigger than it is. A prenup is just... I didn't ask you. She blinked. I turned back to Avery. I would have discussed this with you. Had you come to me privately, told me what you wanted and feared, and suggested separate attorneys in a proper setting, I would have shown up honestly and fairly. Then open the folder, Avery said. Her voice became flat and hard. If you have nothing to hide, just open it. I thought about Doug's office and 4 weeks of careful, legal work. I thought about my father's 31 years in a warehouse, my mother's classroom, the original loan, the 41 employees, 3 facilities, and every morning I had driven to work before sunrise, because that is what you do when something is yours and you refuse to be careless with it. I took my jacket and stood, leaving the folder untouched. Enjoy your legal buffet. I'll see myself out. I walked past the bar, host stand, and valets, then stopped on the sidewalk in the October air and called Doug. He answered on the second ring. They did it tonight. I know. Greg Holloway called my office this afternoon to confirm you would attend. He was also trying to find out whether you had retained separate counsel. What did your office say? That I had no comment. It was the most accurate answer available. I barely slept. Not from anxiety, the anxiety had faded around the second week of restructuring, but from grief. I thought about the Memphis rooftop, her grandmother's ring, and 14 months I had believed were a real partnership. I remembered Avery laughing with me in the car and arriving at my Knoxville facility one Saturday with sandwiches, then spending 45 minutes asking my operations manager sincere questions about the production line. When had that woman become someone who assembled an audience and brought a lawyer named Greg? Maybe she had always been both, and I had only seen the version I wanted. By 8 the next morning, I was at my desk in Nashville, reviewing supply chain reports, when an unfamiliar downtown number called. A precise voice introduced herself as Patricia Oakes, a senior partner at Avery's law firm. I want to acknowledge that last night did not go as planned, she said. The setting was perhaps inappropriate. It was a steakhouse, with 6 people closer to Avery than to me, and a lawyer who did not identify himself until I sat down. After a pause, she insisted there was no hostility and described the matter as a conversation about protecting both parties before marriage. Then she reached the real reason for calling. In preparing the agreement, we conducted a preliminary asset review standard due diligence. We are finding certain things are not where our research suggested. What things? The packaging company and the 3 facilities. We believe the real property, equipment, receivables, and related assets were held in a structure that would be straightforward to address in a prenuptial agreement. The picture has changed significantly. She paused. What did you do with your estate, Mr. Callahan? It was already gone from the simple structure they expected, but it had not been lost, gifted away, hidden, or transferred improperly. The 3 facilities were held through properly organized business entities. The equipment, receivables, and personal assets accumulated through the company were protected through instruments Doug had recommended for years. Nothing had been fabricated after the fact, and nothing belonged to Avery. I had simply completed legitimate restructuring before a marriage existed. I had finally stopped being careless. My estate is exactly where it has always been, I said. My attorney can explain the structure in a proper meeting. The silence lengthened. How long ago did you make these changes? Discuss that with Douglas Pritchard. He has represented me for 11 years. His number is on my company website. She thanked me and ended the call. I looked through the glass toward the production floor. Machines were running and orders moving. 6 employees had worked for me more than 8 years, and 2 for over a decade. I thought about my father giving me $12,000 without a contract, relying only on his faith that I would work. Then I thought about the distance between the Avery I believed I knew and the person her actions revealed. Grief lives inside that distance. I set the phone down and returned to work. Avery called 4 times that day. I let every call go to voicemail. By evening, she had sent 10 messages, moving from apologetic to explanatory, defensive, briefly threatening, and apologetic again. Nora texted twice. Darcy sent one message. I'm sorry about last night. That wasn't right. I appreciated it more than I could say. 3 days later, I called Avery because 14 months deserved one real conversation. She answered immediately, sounding exhausted and more like herself than she had at the dinner. I'm going to say some things, I told her. I need you to listen. Okay. If you had come to me and said you wanted a prenup to protect both of us, and that we should each have independent counsel, I would have had that conversation. I would have been fair and honest, because that is how I handle important things. But you hired an attorney in secret. Your attorney investigated my company without my knowledge. You invited me to dinner under false pretenses, surrounded me with your people, and surprised me with a lawyer, expecting social pressure to push me toward whatever was in that folder. You never asked whether it was fair to me. After a long silence, she asked, where did I go wrong with you? When did I become someone you needed protection from? The question sounded genuine. I don't know, but somewhere between the rooftop in Memphis and the steakhouse on West End, that is what happened. I don't think we can fix it. She cried, and it affected me. Grief is still grief when what you mourn was damaged before it ended. The wedding, she said. There are deposits, vendors. My mother has, I'll cover my half of every cancellation cost. Send the invoices. I will not make this ugly. Wyatt. I hope you find what you're looking for, Avery. I hope someday you find something honest enough that you do not feel the need to corner, prepare for, or strategize against the person beside you. I ended the call and sat alone in the apartment on a Tuesday evening in October, the month that should have been ours. The ring box was on the kitchen counter where I had left it after the ridgeline because I had not known what else to do with it. Inside was her grandmother's ring, the same ring I had carried onto the Memphis rooftop while rehearsing a proposal I never managed to finish. I stared at it for a long time. The wedding was canceled. The Cumberland River venue was gracious, but enforced its cancellation policy. Some vendors were understanding, and others frustrated, which was fair because they had reserved an October date and turned away other work. I paid my portion of every invoice, and Avery's family handled theirs. Neither side created a public fight. It was painful, transactional, and necessary. At work, I became so quiet that Tyler, my operations manager of 11 years, brought me coffee one morning and asked, "Boss, you doing okay?" "Getting there, Tyler." He nodded and did not press. Patricia Oakes later sent a formal inquiry through Doug's office, asking whether I would make voluntary financial disclosures after the engagement ended. Doug replied politely in about 4 sentences. The answer was no. I did not outwit or trick Avery. I did not hide money from a spouse or design a revenge scheme. I finally followed years of legal advice because the woman I trusted had begun treating me less like a partner and more like a financial asset to manage before a transaction closed. Still, Avery was not a simple villain. A previous partner had left her financially vulnerable after a long relationship. That experience had taught her to value protection over openness. Fear made her strategic instead of direct, and she tried to secure something good before it could be taken. I understood the fear, but understanding did not excuse her choices. I carefully packed her grandmother's ring, insured it fully, and returned it by registered mail with a short note. "This belongs with your family. Take care of yourself." When it arrived, she texted, "Thank you." That was all, and it was enough. 4 months after the Ridgeline dinner, I was at the Huntsville facility for a quarterly review when a message arrived from an unknown number. "You don't know me, but I know what happened at the steakhouse. My name is Carson Bright. I was at the table next to yours." Carson was a 41-year-old architect from Brentwood who had been dining with a client. He overheard enough to understand the folder, Greg's introduction, and my response. 3 weeks later, he saw one of our Nashville delivery trucks on Interstate 65, recognized the company name from our conversation, and found me through the website. He was contacting me because his fiancée of 2 years had recently shown him a document prepared by her family's attorney. It had been presented casually over dinner at her parents' home, with her parents and 2 siblings present. The surrounding pressure felt painfully familiar to him, and he did not know whether the document itself was the problem or whether the way it had been introduced had damaged the relationship. We met for coffee in Huntsville on a Saturday. Carson looked like a man carrying something heavy with no idea how to put it down. I told him about Doug's warning, the 4 weeks of preparation, the ambush, Patricia's call, the canceled wedding, and the returned ring. He listened completely. "So what do I do? Did your fiancée tell you herself, or did you find out another way?" "She told me. She said her parents pressured her. She was embarrassed and did not know how to raise it, but she wanted to be honest." "That is different." "Is it?" "Very. The document and request may be similar, but someone who comes to you directly and admits the truth is not the same as someone who assembles an audience and surprises you with a lawyer. What they ask matters, but how they ask matters too." I advised him to retain an independent attorney, with no connection to her family, review every provision, and speak privately with his fiancée before the lawyers met. I told him to notice whether she welcomed fair review or resented it, whether she wanted protection for both of them or an advantage for herself. Carson followed the advice. He and his fiancée negotiated an agreement both attorneys considered genuinely fair, married in May, and seemed to be doing well. We have remained in occasional contact. I think about how the same piece of paper can mean completely different things depending on who hands it to you, why they want it, and whether they choose honesty or manipulation. My brother in Clarksville later asked whether I regretted anything. Tyler asked the same question over beers near the Nashville facility. Would I have signed a prenup if Avery had presented it honestly? I do not know. That version of events never happened. The version that did happen revealed something necessary. Under pressure, the woman I intended to marry chose strategy over honesty and tried to manage me instead of speaking to me as an equal. That was not a minor problem we could negotiate around. It was a fundamental difference in what partnership meant to us. The 4 weeks of legal work were not punishment. They were overdue responsibility. My father worked 31 years in a warehouse and trusted me with $12,000. I could honor that only by protecting everything built on top of it. Strangely, I was no longer angry. Even at the table, anger had never been the strongest feeling. I had been sad, disillusioned, and for nearly 2 weeks the quietest version of myself. I was grieving the person I thought Avery was, the future I expected, and the ordinary married life I had already begun imagining. The cream-colored folder, Greg Holloway, and the table full of Avery's people showed me the truth before October, before the Cumberland River venue, and before I read vows from the notebook in my nightstand. It was a brutal gift, but it arrived before it was too late. 6 months after the canceled wedding, I drove to my parents' house in Clarksville. The chain-link fence and backyard dogwood were unchanged. The driveway had needed repaving since around 1997, but still survived through stubbornness. My father was in the garage, tinkering with a car that did not urgently need fixing. I sat on a metal stool and told him everything. He listened without interruption, then wiped his hands on a shop cloth. "You okay?" "Yeah, I'm okay. You do the right things?" "I think so." He nodded and turned back to the engine. "Then that's what matters." My mother made the same pot roast she had made since I was 7. My brother, his wife, and their children came over. The kids ran through the house and knocked something from a shelf, and nobody became especially upset. We talked about everything and nothing. Looking at my uncomplicated, honest family, I felt some of the weight lift. No one at that table wanted my balance sheet, my valuation, or an advantage over me. They wanted to know whether I was eating, sleeping, working, and recovering. Not all the pain disappeared, because these things rarely leave completely, but enough lifted for me to know the company, my life, and my future were still worth building. The foundation remained sound, even though one part of the plan had used the wrong material. I still work the same hours and reach the Nashville facility before 7 most mornings. Huntsville has performed especially well, and we are analyzing a fourth facility in either Chattanooga or Birmingham. Tyler will be promoted to Regional Operations Director before the end of the year. He deserves it, and I look forward to telling him. I have not started dating again. I am not opposed to it. I simply do not have the space, and I have learned not to force what is not ready. The notebook containing my unfinished vows remains in my nightstand. I have not opened it because I already know what it says. I meant every word when I wrote it, and meaning it then is enough. The future does not owe you the circumstances in which your sincerity was formed. It only asks you to continue. So I continue. That is what you do when something is yours, and you refuse to let it be taken from you. You keep going.